the Coders Campus podcast, where you'll learn how to code from one of the best teachers in the industry. Whether you're an absolute beginner or a seasoned pro, the Coders Campus podcast will teach you what you need to know to master the art of programming. And now, your host, Trevor Page.
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow coders, welcome to this episode, which is number 12 or 13, number 12, there we go, of the Coders Campus podcast. Welcome. Very professional. I always know what episode I'm recording. So today, as promised, I'm going to be diving into what I said I was going to be diving into in the last episode, which is talking about Java 8's new optional keyword. At least I believe that's what I promised I would be talking to you about today. If not, then hey, apparently I broke my promise and I have the memory of an 80-year-old. So welcome to the episode. We're going to be learning all about the optional keyword today. And it's going to be very exciting because this is something that is a big thorn in all of our sides as Java programmers. And it's something that Java has finally, pulled its socks up and decided to address. So, what is the optional keyword? So I'll start by explaining first and talking about null pointer exceptions. So I'm sure you know what a null pointer exception is, because null pointer exceptions are a royal pain in the butt. They can strike at almost any point if your code encounters any sort of edge cases that you hadn't previously thought of or tested or something like that. And when a null pointer exception is thrown, it can really have a bad, severe impact on the quality of your user's experience. For something as simple as saying like, hey, there's nothing here. This is just a null value. It's amazing how serious that problem can really be. The problem of having nothing. That's where Java 8 has, like I said, stepped up their game and finally provided us with a keyword that can help us solve the issue of rampant null pointer exceptions that we experience all the time. My most favorable, what's the word I'm looking for? My most hated moment with null pointer exceptions are when I have to program in a whole bunch of extra checks when I'm doing something as simple as like logging values to my console or using just a regular old log4j logger or something like that, where you don't want to, you try to grab a value, you do object dot get this value or whatever. Let's say you have a user, maybe you want to log some details about a user, so you say user dot get username, user dot get usernames, user has done this or blah, 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 whatever, you're logging that stuff out. But what happens if the user object happens to be null? Well, you're going to get a null pointer exception just because you're trying to output something to a log file. And that could just break anything that could be happening. Like, what if you're running a big batch job and you've got a million records that you need to process overnight, and it's really critical that you get these records processed overnight, and the whole thing fails because you were trying to output something to a log, which has nothing to do with the function of the batch job. It has nothing to do in terms of the business logic, other than you just trying to be a good Samaritan and logging out what sort of happened so that later, if you need to, you can go and debug something or whatever by looking at the log. So you're trying to be a good person, and in doing so, you destroy the whole system, and everyone hates you, and you kicked you out of the office, and you lose your job, and now you're homeless on the streets, all because of a null pointer exception. That's not actually going to happen. But having said that, there is light at the end of this tunnel that is not a train. It is the optional keyword. So the Java 8 optional keyword is used as a sort of wrapper around objects, just like a container. Think of it like an actual physical container, like a box, and you can drop your objects into this box, or rather you could maybe drop nothing into this box, and the box is called optional. So the Oracle has a great tutorial on this keyword, and if you go to the show notes for this episode, coderscampus.com/12, you'll be able to see there's a link on the Oracle tutorial, which is actually fairly well written. I felt it was written in fairly plain English, which is not something that usually happens with technical documentation. I found that I was very easily able to read through it, which is why I'm referencing it directly and not someone else's blog post. So good job, Oracle, for writing that one. In any case, they use an example of a sound card inside of a computer to illustrate the example of talking about the optional keyword or the optional container, if you will. So that's what I'll be using throughout this sort of episode, is going to be using the sound card in a computer example. So if you've ever built a computer before, you should, well, if you have or if you haven't, you should hopefully know that computers have sound cards, which is what makes the sound come out of them, and they're typically plugged into some sort of a slot in your computer, whether it be a bus or a USB or something like that. It has some sort of way to plug a physical piece of sound card hardware into the computer's motherboard so that you can actually, interact with, plug in some speakers to the sound card and actually listen to something coming out of your computer. So a computer can have a sound card, or maybe it could be missing a sound card. Maybe the person hasn't installed it yet. So this would be a great example of using the optional keyword to get around a possible null pointer exception. Okay, so I have a good diagram of that I also stole from the Oracle article that I'm referencing in my show notes page, and it's a picture of a blue box. Okay, this is the box, the container I'm talking about. And inside of the blue box, there is a red box that says sound card on it. So it's a red box inside of a blue box. The blue box represents the optional wrapper. The red box represents your regular old object. Okay, the objects you're always used to working with. In this case, the sound card object. So that is an optional wrapper that wraps around the sound card object. Or consequently, or subsequently, you have a big blue box with absolutely nothing inside of it. Okay, that represents an empty optional sort of, container, if you will. So that's, it's a visual. So, like I said, check out the show notes and that'll make a whole lot more sense when you see it. But let's say you're in a situation where you're pre-Java 8. So you're Java 7 or 6 or 5. God forbid you're on 5 or 4. Hopefully you guys are whenever you start a new project, you're going to be using Java 8 or whatever the most recent version of Java is. Always take advantage of the most recent version of Java. Your future self will thank you for it. Anyway, if you're using a pre-Java 8 version, here's how you would have dealt with the possible null pointer exception issues that would arise from this situation. So let's say a computer is an object. A computer contains a sound card. And the sound card's an object, obviously. The sound card contains a USB object, and the USB object has a property called version. And what you want to do is you want to get the version from the computer. So you want to get the version of the sound card in the USB that's in the computer. Okay? So how would you do this pre-Java 8? Well, you would start with maybe a default value. So you'd initialize a string. You'd say string version equals, and you'd say maybe unknown, because you don't know what version it is. You start with that in mind. And you would say if the computer is not equal to null, then go in and do something. So we know that the computer is not equal to null. Cool. Then inside there, you could say soundcard variable equals computer.getSoundCard. And we can invoke a computer.getSoundCard because we know the computer is not equal to null. So now we should have or not have a soundcard object. So we want to dive further into the sound card object. We want to access the USB property on the sound card. But before we can do that, we don't know if it's null or not. So we do another null check. If sound card is not equal to null, then go ahead and do something. And what we want to go ahead and do is say soundcard.getUSB. Okay, and assign that to a USB variable. Okay, now we want to get USB, the version on the USB. But we can't just say USB.getVersion because we need to do a null check. So we say if USB is not equal to null, then we can say version equals USB.getVersion. So we had to do 3 different null checks, one on computer, one on sound card, one on USB, just to make sure that we can get a version and assign the version to our string. And like I said, if at any point any one of those is null, then the version will remain its default value, which is unknown. Okay, that's what we've always been doing. So it took up 10 lines of code, maybe more if you're using a different style of coding. I tend to use brackets on new lines for my opening and closing brackets. Just a habit of mine that I picked up from one of my other jobs. So, this is a more condensed version at 10 lines. But if you were to use my way of coding, it'd probably be another 3, so it'd be 13 lines of code to do what I just said. It's a pretty big mess, right? We're probably also used to writing this kind of code to check for nulls that, we don't really register how much of a mess it is, but it's madness. It really is. So now let's, bring in the optional syntax with Java 8. So now, thank God we can, use Java 8 now to our rescue, so we can write it with some nicer code. So what we can do is we can declare inside of the computer object the sound card object and the USB object, we can declare each of our objects with an optional wrapper. Okay, so inside of our instance variables, we have, a private sound card object, and we would normally just say private sound card, and then we'd say, public sound card, get sound card, and we would return the sound card. That's how we would normally do getters and setters with the instance variables. But now in this case, we're going to wrap it with the optional keyword. And the wrapper, I haven't said this yet, I just realized you probably don't know what this wrapper thing looks like. It's just it looks like generics. Right? It looks like, when you declare a list or a map or a set, you use the angle brackets, right? The less than and the greater than sign. Same thing with optional. You say optional with a capital O, and then you use your angle brackets with the sound card object inside of it. Okay? So it almost looks like you're creating, it's almost like a list of sound cards, but it's not a list of sound cards. It's an optional of sound cards. And I shouldn't say sound cards plural. It's an optional of sound card. Okay? And the same for in the sound card class, you have an optional of USB. And inside the USB, well, you don't have any optional because all you have is just the version and that's it, which is just a string, so that'll be all right. Although, could you have an optional string? Yeah, because string could be null. I don't see why you wouldn't be able to do an optional of string as well. But they just didn't do that in their example. In any case, it's pretty straightforward. Just wrap your, use a Java generics to say it's an optional of this object. So that's the wrapper, right? You're wrapping your object in the optional keyword. Fair enough. So we've done this, fantastic, but then how do we access the values inside of this stuff? So let's use an example of Java 8 streams to get this job done. And if you haven't, checked out my previous episode on streams, which is in episode 10, and I think I talked about it in 11, which is the last episode as well, do go and check that out because that is critical for you to understand what I'm about to talk about. And that is the fact that we are going to be using or invoking a stream. So to do this, we're going to assume that we have like a list of computers or a set of computer objects or something, some sort of a collection of computers that we can invoke the .stream method on so that we can go and do our work, right? So we invoke computers.stream, and then from here we're going to have a flat map, and we're going to pass in a method reference of computer get sound card. So computer : get sound card, another Java 8 thing where you can do method references. And when we're doing a flat map, that means that we're going to take the sound card and we're going to flatten it out inside of the stream so that we can keep, going with it. And we're not just doing a regular old map. So we're not mapping to one, down to one field or something like that. We're going to have a flat map, which can contain 0 or more, elements inside of it. So we're going to get, flatten it out, get all the elements inside of a sound card. And then we're going to do another flat map on that and get all the elements of the USB, right? All the properties of the USB. And then we're going to do a dot map to map just the version. Because remember, all we want to get is just the version. So we want to map, USB get version. So another method reference. And then what we're going to do is, I know this sounds confusing, but again, it makes more sense when you see it in code. But then the critical part here is then we're going to invoke the dot or else. Okay? And when you say dot or else, this is accounting for the case when you don't have an object. Okay? If at any point the flat map to get the sound card or the flat map to get the USB or the map to get the version, if any of those are null, it'll go and fall back to the or else method that you've just passed in. Or invoked, I should say. You're not passing anything in, you're invoking methods on a chain. So when you do the dot or else, you can pass in the default version, and that will be unknown. Okay, in string as a string, unknown, because that's what we did in the example above. So that is how you would get essentially a list of versions, USB versions from a stream of computers. So it's actually a bit more involved than what we had previously. Previously, we were just looking at one computer, and we were getting the value from the one computer. But in this case, I'm using a stream, which is just more powerful. All right. So what happens is, like I said, if the computer at any point doesn't have a sound card or if it doesn't have a USB, then it will return unknown. Okay. And the most important thing is there's no null pointers that happen here. So it's quite safe. It's a completely beautifully safe operation, and it reads nicely. It doesn't look like a bunch of null. The word null never even appears in our new code. So really, that what this optional keyword is doing is that it's forcing us to deal with the null case. Okay, it's forcing us. We see it in front of us. We have the or else. We're dealing with it and we're dealing with it in a nice way. Okay, it's forcing us to do that. So, very good, cool. That's how you would get, optional values from, like I said, a stream. But what happens if we're not dealing with a stream? What happens if we're just dealing with singular objects here? Like I was saying before, with a singular computer, right? So, what are we going to do? Well, this is also pretty straightforward stuff. All we do is we can actually invoke sort of a static helper method on the optional keyword. So we can say optional.of, and then we can pass in a new sound card. And what that will do is that will return an optional of sound card, right? An optional, like I said, a list of sound card, type of thing, like a collection of something. This is an optional of something. So it's optional with the angled brackets, and inside of it is sound card. Okay, so you can say optional of sound card, and you declare it as, that's the type. Optional of sound card is the type. That's how I would say it. And then you put in the variable name, which is, sound card, or I put an SC for short because I was lazy. And then you can say equals optional dot of. So you see, we're actually saying out loud, we're using the dot of, what we call it, syntax, because that's how we say it out loud. We say optional of sound card when I was declaring the type, right? List of something, set of something, collection of something, optional of something. Okay, so that just makes sense. I assume that's why they created the optional dot of method, to be able to pass in, you pass in an object in there, and that's creating the optional wrapper around that object that you've put in. Okay, so the one thing that you need to understand here with this one is that when you perform an optional.of call, so in other words, you're going to be returning an optional object wrapper. When we do the optional.of, the value shouldn't be null. Otherwise, it will still throw a null pointer exception. This one's a bit interesting to me. I don't understand why it works like that. I didn't dig in further to understand it, but that does seem a bit odd. The whole point of optional is to get rid of the null pointer, situation. But if you do an optional.of, and you pass in a null pointer exception, or a null value, and then you try to access that null value, it will give you a null pointer exception. So, if that seems strange to you, which it does seem strange to me, then you will likely prefer a different method, which is, instead of saying optional.of, you can say optional.of nullable, and then you pass in your object. So if you do an optional.of nullable and pass in, the property, the object that you want to pass in, if that object happens to be null, what you get in return is, when you try to access that object, is you just get an empty optional object. Okay, so you don't get a null pointer exception, you just get an empty optional object. In other words, remember that blue box I was talking about before, blue with a red box inside of it? You're just going to get the blue box, which is an empty optional object. Okay, so that's much nicer. I can't imagine why I'd want to say optional.of as opposed to favoring optional.of nullable. I can't see why I'd want to use the first one over the second one. But hey, I'm fairly new to this as well, so I'm sure there must be some sort of advantage to using it in the first way by just saying optional.of. Who knows? So fair enough. That's good to know. Good to understand how you would sort of assign values and be able to create them on the fly. But then that's just populating the object. Now what you want to do is you want to do stuff with your optional value and your optional wrapper and the object inside of it. You want to do something with it. So let's do this. Let's say we want to do a print line. We want to output the sound card onto the console. How would you do that pre-Java 8? Okay, you'd have a sound card, and you would say if sound card is not equal to null, then you'd have inside your brackets, you'd say system.out.println sound card, right? That is a typical thing that you would do if you didn't have Java 8. You'd say if the sound card is not equal to null, so there's your null check, then go ahead and do whatever it is that you want to do with it, because it'll be safe to do whatever it is that you want to do with it. So what you can do here is let's upgrade to Java 8. And what you can do here is, let's say you have your sound card object, but this sound card object is a optional of sound card, which is nice. It has the optional wrapper. So because it's an optional of sound card data type, you can invoke the soundcard.ifPresent method. Okay, so soundcard.ifPresent, which is essentially the replacement for your null check before, your if null check. So instead of explicitly saying if the sound card is not equal to null, then do something, we've sort of put that into a more functional programming paradigm, and you can say soundcard.ifPresent, then you can pass in your method reference if you want to system out print line, system out :print line, which is kind of nice. Use some Java 8 syntax to do it that way. It's very nice stuff. I love it. Because I believe if present takes, what is that? Is it a consumer interface? Actually, that's a good question. So if I said pp.if, I'm talking to myself. Yeah, it's a consumer. So it takes a consumer interface. Okay. So consumer is just, it consumes the object and doesn't do anything with it, doesn't return anything, which is why you can pass in system out print line as a method reference, because it's a consumer. So that makes a lot more sense, right? It's nicer to do soundcard.ifPresent, so you can put it all on one line instead of on 3 different lines essentially, or 2 different lines if you want to get rid of the angle or the curly brackets for your scope. So if there's a value present in the optional wrapper, it'll get printed out to the console. Otherwise, it won't get printed out to the console. So you're not going to be throwing a stupid null pointer exception because you tried to print an empty object to the console. So logging, especially, just got 10 times easier and safer, right? You don't have to put in a whole bunch of null checks or the ternary operators. If you're building a big string out, sometimes they use the ternary operator a lot, which I think I should talk about next. But it's so much nicer to be able to do that. I love it. It's going to make I absolutely love all the stuff that Java 8 has brought to the table, and I'm really late in adopting it because it's been out for a couple of years now. But hey, better late than never, right? So also I wanted to mention you can also do soundcard.isPresent, and that is a check, a Boolean check, and it returns true if the object is present inside. Otherwise, it returns false. So previously we said soundcard.ifPresent. Okay, if soundcard.ifPresent takes a consumer interface, takes a parameter, soundcard.isPresent does not take any parameters. Okay, it returns true or false depending on what you have inside of whether or not there's something inside of the optional wrapper. So you can say if present or is present, right? Which if you're using is present, you're going to be doing it in an if statement anyway. So why wouldn't you just use if present? But if you want to do more than just anyway, whatever. I'm sure there's times when that is becomes a handy dandy little thing that you can use. Also you can also just get your object from the optional container if you want by saying soundcard.get, and that's it. You don't have to say get an index or anything. There's no indices here because there's only one object inside of it, so you don't need to pass it an index. So you say soundcard.get, and it'll give you back the sound card inside of there. But be careful by using that because it will throw a no such element exception if there is no object in the container, which again is kind of annoying to me. I don't want an exception. I want it, if I said soundcard.get and there's no sound card in there, why wouldn't it just return an empty optional container, right? Again, these guys at Java must be smarter than me. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. There must be a reason why either that can't happen or they don't do it that way. In any case, you need to be careful, and that's where you would wrap it with the is present check, right? You would say is present, and then you would say soundcard.get, or maybe you could just say soundcard.ifPresent, then you say soundcard.get, right? Although you'd have to say, could you say soundcard.get? Actually, let me type that out. I'm curious. Like I said, I'm fairly new to this as well, so I haven't really played around with it too much. So let me see. I have a thing here, so I'll say if present, and then I can say dot get, but I don't think that'll work. No, because you need a consumer. So the consumer, could I say this? No, that doesn't work either. You obviously can't see what I'm typing on the screen. I'm essentially I tried to pass a lambda expression there. So let me see. And then let me try. I guess you can't do it with the if present. At least not that I can see any way to go about returning the actual entire object itself, which is using if present. So you'd probably have to use is present. Check to see if it is present, and then you can say soundcard.get. That would be the safest way to do it. But there's got to be a quicker way to do it, than that. But anyway, I won't get into that right now. So what I will get into is the default values and actions that I was talking about previously with ternary operators. Okay, so I was talking about using logging and ternary operators in a log or logging line is kind of annoying. So pre Java 8, the common scenario would be to say, let's say we're we're trying to assign a sound card that we have to an object, another sound card object or something like that. So I guess this wouldn't be a very common thing. You wouldn't say take a sound card and assign it to another sound card object, but this is the example that they gave to me, and it's very similar to the type of ternary operator check that I would do, inside of a log or something like that. So let's just pretend we have this inside of a log line where we're doing an output or something. You could picture it as being this scenario. So anyway, what they do is they say sound card, the type, sound card, the variable. So sound card type, sound card variable equals. So we're doing an assignment. We're creating a variable called sound card of type sound card, and we're saying equals. So we're assigning something to it. And then we have another variable called a sound card. Okay, or they had it as maybe sound card, as in like maybe there's a sound card, maybe there's not. So it's just another sound card variable. And what we do is we say a sound card not equal to null ? So we're saying that's a ternary operator with a question mark. So we say a sound card not equal to null ? So then if it's not equal to null, if it's the true case of that, then we return a sound card back to the sound card variable that we're declaring. Otherwise, in the case that it is null, we have the colon, the ternary operator, colon of the ternary operator. Then we return a new sound card. So we instantiate a brand new sound card. We pass in some sort of, whatever you want to initialize the sound card. So that way, there's no way that this variable that we're declaring is going to be null, right? It has a default value. If in the event that, the a sound card is null, the sound card object will have, or sound card variable will have a default value. So there's a way that you can clean it up with Java 8. I believe I already mentioned this method. Yes, I did, back when I was talking about the streaming part of it. But we can also use this particular method outside of the streaming example. Do you remember what I said when we were doing streams? Remember I was saying computers.stream, and I did a flat map of sound cards, and I did a flat map of USB, and I did a map of, the USB version. And then I said dot something in the case that it was, null, then it should do this, right? If it's empty, then you should do something else. If you have a good memory, you remember what I said. If not, I will refresh your memory. So let's rewrite the code that I was just talking about with the ternary operator. We can rewrite it as such, or like so, if you will. You can say sound card equals a sound card dot or else. Okay, that's the method I was talking about before with streams, or else. So a sound card dot or else, and then you pass in your new sound card with some whatever default value inside of it, whatever value you want to have inside of it as the default value, right? So that is a nicer way to do it. There's no ternary operator going on. There's no null check going on. We're just using a sound card dot or else, and we can invoke the dot or else method because I'm assuming because the a sound card variable has a type optional of sound card, right? So it should be an optional of sound card data type in order to invoke the dot or else. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to do dot or else because that's what this optional is all about. So there you go. We're able to, bring in it will assign the a sound card value in the case that it is not null, or else if it is null, it will return the new default version of the sound card. Okay, and that will be assigned back to the original sound card variable that we are trying to assign it to. So anyway, point is here, or else is powerful. Or else allows you to give default values. What else do we learn? We learned about checking if present. We can say, the optional variable dot if present, then we can do a consumer. So we can pass in a consumer functional interface. Okay, or we can say, the optional value dot is present to check and see if there is something in there, and if there is, we can say that object dot get to just get that object. Okay, what else did we talk about? We talked about doing optional dot of nullable. So if you want to create a brand new object, we can do optional dot of nullable and pass in that new object, and that way, if what we have passing into that of nullable is a null value, then we will get a nice empty optional object back when we try to access that particular variable, right? So that's nice. We also learned about optional.of. So there's of and of nullable. And yeah, we learned about the or else when we're doing streams, or we can use or else when we're just using a plain old optional object in any way, shape, or form, right? So there you go. If you're new to Java 8, this might seem complicated, but it's not complicated. It's actually pretty simple stuff. It's just unfamiliar at this point, which is why I'm saying you got to check out the show notes. coderscampus.com/12 will have all of the stuff that I just talked about, as well as that link to the Oracle article, which is a sort of tongue twister to say, but you can go check out the Oracle's article to see exactly, all the nitty gritty of the optional keyword. It's a very straightforward keyword. So it's just a matter of getting used to using it, right? It's just a matter of forcing yourself to say, hey, hold on a second. If I'm writing a null check right now, I'm typing in if not equal to null, that should be the red flag to say, hold on a second, I can use optional here. Okay, so try not to write not equal to null anymore. If not equal to null, that should be your signal that you should stop everything and consider upgrading to Java 8 code. Okay, just like when you're doing streams in the past 2 episodes, if you're doing a bunch of for loops all the time, a for each loop, should hit the pause button and say, hold on, I'm writing a for each loop. Maybe I should use a stream instead. Okay, that's the other flag for when you should, write different Java 8 code instead of Java 7 or previous code, right? So there you go. Hopefully that was a, helpful little tutorial session for you guys on the Java 8 stuff. I'm really getting to love the Java 8 stuff. Like I said, it took me a little bit longer to get on board, to learn this stuff. I've been busy with all this, business stuff that I'm doing, but hey, I'm getting there now, and I'm getting it out there and teaching you guys. So hopefully you guys are absolutely loving this stuff as much as I am. So I'll wrap things up by saying, hey, if you want to check out coderscampus.com, like I said, we have a Coders Campus membership platform where you learned all about this stuff inside the membership platform. So I teach you, how to go from zero to really hero when it comes to Java development, specifically web application development. I know a lot of you guys have been asking me about Android development, and I just haven't gotten there yet. I find that Android and the iOS apps, there's a lot of them out there now. It's very, very saturated, the market, and it's very tough to break into it if you're, building out new, apps for yourself to try to publish them. So I've sort of been hesitant in diving into the Android stuff, but for those of you who want to get into it for learning about how to create web applications, which is a huge market, both in being able to create your own products or getting into getting hired as a Java programmer and getting paid a very great lucrative salary, the Coders Campus is where you want to go. Coders Campus teaches you everything you need to know from start to finish on how to be a full stack Java web application developer. There's a lot of words in there. Full stack means you learn about JavaScript, you learn about HTML, you learn about CSS, you learn about the presentation layer, right? Then you learn about Ajax and how to do cool stuff with communicating with the backend, the server, via Ajax, asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Okay, I'm even going to be talking about AngularJS, which is a very popular framework that sort of piggybacks on a lot of the Spring MVC stuff. So it kind of alleviates your needs on Spring MVC when you're bringing in a AngularJS, which people love this stuff, and I'm starting to learn it and I'm starting to teach it inside of the Coders Campus as well. But not only that, not only do you learn the presentation layer, but obviously you learn about Java, because that's what I'm the expert in. So you learn about Java from start to finish and how to be an enterprise Java developer. And then I also teach about databases and SQL. So you learn how to do good database design. You learn about your, first normal form, second normal form, third normal form, all that stuff. You learn how to design a database. You learn how to maintain the database. And you learn all the tricks on how to communicate with a database between Java and databases using things like Hibernate and JPA, right? So there's a whole load there's like 100 and I don't even know anymore, 155 hours worth of content. And every week I'm adding new content into it. I'm doing new videos every single week. I'm putting new stuff in there. Latest and greatest, examples, real world examples. So I just finished up building an e-commerce platform. So where you can go and build an e-commerce store for yourself. You can add products, assign prices to those products, and then, sell those products. And you can go and log in as a what do you call it, a producer, someone who's selling stuff. You can log in and create your account that way, your store. And then you can also go and see it as a consumer, someone who will go and look at the products and choose to purchase them, add them to the shopping cart and purchase them, that kind of thing. I built that entire app. It was like it's turning into like a 17-part series. It's massive. And that's just one of like 5 or 6 different real world workshop scenarios where I, dive into a real world problem and solve it using the latest and greatest in Java technologies. Awesome stuff. People love the tutorials. All that stuff comes with Coders Campus. So Coders Campus is your one-stop shop for learning how to code, whether it's to build your own apps for fun, or to build your own apps to sell, or it's to get a job as a programmer. Okay, this is the one-stop shop, and you can start today. I don't know if I mentioned this before. You can start today for $1. Okay, I have a $1 30-day trial. You can get it for a full month for just $1. Check it out. If you don't like it, you can cancel. There's no contracts. There's no shady stuff going on here. If it's not for you, that's fine. There's no hard feelings. You can walk away. But if you love it, hey, you can stay on board and keep on going, right? So $1 for 30 days. You can check that out at coderscampus.com/trial. Okay, trial like a 30-day trial. Right, so for $1 you can jump on board. It's an incredible deal. You'll see exactly how amazing the community is too. You can interact with people inside of there. I have a Facebook group, etc., etc. So if you haven't checked that out yet already, do so. It's going to be well worth your time if you have a goal of being a Java developer, rather a full stack Java web application developer. This is the go-to course that you need to be inside of and taking. So check it out, coderscampus.com/trial. That's all I'll say about that. Enjoy your week or weekend or day or evening or whatever it is that you're doing right now. I hope you had a lot of fun with me on this podcast, and I look forward to doing this on the next show, right? That'll be episode 13, probably another Java 8 stuff concept we'll be diving into too, but who knows? We'll see when we get there. So take care of yourself, happy learning, and bye for now.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Coders Campus podcast. But before you go, Trevor has a favor to ask you. In order to keep these episodes free, he'd love for you to leave a rating and review the podcast on iTunes. Just go to coderscampus.com/review to leave your own rating and review of the show. So if you have 30 seconds to spare right now, please help out by leaving a rating and review via coderscampus.com/review. It will ensure that you continue to get these awesome free podcast episodes each and every week. So if you like free swag, head on over to coderscampus.com/review. Happy learning!